thank you, Richard, and everybody for such a kind welcome. And it was high time that I visited Monastery and Hopkins Festival. I'm thrilled to be here. Milton and, the other thing I wanted to say was what a wonderful first session we had from James. I loved everything about it. It was relaxed, it was informal, it was inspirational, insightful. I shall be inferior in every one of those regards, so I apologize straight away, but this is very regimented. You are, though, kindly allowing me the favour of talking about two of my favourite poets, Milton and Hopkins, and I've long had this ambition to do a study of how they relate to each other. And we shall see how Milton was a major influence on Hopkins, but at the same time note the enormous differences between them. They have, of course, one huge assumption in common, and that is their Christian faith. Both believe firmly in God's existence and sovereignty, but experience problems and pain in their lives. As Charles Williams puts it in his introduction to the 1932 edition of Hopkins' poems, the simultaneous consciousness of a controlled universe and yet of division, conflict and crises within the universe is hardly so poignantly expressed in any other English poets than those two. But beyond that fundamental agreement, there is violent disagreement, and at first sight they seem most unlikely bedfellows. On the one hand, Milton gives the proselytizing Roman Catholic party of his day in England, and especially the Jesuits, a very bad press in Lycidas when he attacks what the grim wolf with privy paw daily devours apace, and nothing said. On the other hand, Hopkins castigates Luther in the Wreck of the Deutschland as beast of the waste wood, and would probably find even stronger words for more extreme Protestants like Milton. Hopkins profoundly disagreed with Milton's doctrine, especially on the subject of divorce. In his eyes, that debased Milton as a person. To Bridges, he wrote of Milton, "I think he was a very bad man. Those who, contrary to our Lord's command, both break themselves and, as St. Paul says, consent to those who break the sacred bond of marriage, like Luther and Milton, fall with eyes open into the terrible judgment of God." But he was able to distance his personal abhorrence for Milton the thinker from his admiration for Milton the poet. To Dixon, he wrote, "His verse, as one reads it, seems something necessary and eternal. Milton's art is incomparable, not only in English literature, but I should think almost in any, equal, if not more than equal, to the finest of Greek or Rome." You could hardly get higher praise than that. Milton was a frequent topic of his correspondence with Bridges and Dixon. He followed orthodox opinion in regularly bracketing Shakespeare and Milton together as the top two English poets, whether in their poetical language, their mastery of phrase and rhetoric, or their beautiful sonnets. Now, I should say that I brought with me we have published this talk that I'm giving this morning, Hopkins and Milton, and in something like I've just mentioned, 3 areas where he thought highly of Milton and Shakespeare. I haven't time to give you all those quotes now, but they are included in this published version, so if you want to check everything that I say, it's here, it's on sale, it's at €5 a copy afterwards if you'd like it. But although he brackets Milton with Shakespeare, he actually found Milton a more approachable model. Comparisons with Shakespeare could be depressing. James mentioned this sadly unfinished play by Hopkins called St. Winifred's Well. And part of what led him reluctantly to abandon that beloved project was that he realised how ill-equipped a dramatist he was beside Shakespeare. But Milton was fine. The two words, Milton and fine, almost became synonyms in his mind. He praised Bridges for one line he had written. "It is Miltonic and fine," he wrote. On other occasions, Miltonic means beautiful. He recommended Bridges' book, The Growth of Love, to his mother, saying they're very beautiful sonnets, designedly written in Miltonic rhythms. And meanwhile, he wrote to Dixon that the mean or standard of English style and diction culminated in Milton. He felt of Milton the same as he did about Henry Purcell, the English composer. In the introduction to his sonnet about Purcell, he says that he, Purcell, transcended all other composers, and this led Hopkins, in his own words, to hope Purcell is not damned for being a Protestant, because I love his genius. And we have no record of him articulating quite such generous sentiments towards Milton, but for him it would be logical consequence of the equal love he felt for these two English cultural heroes. Norman White comments how Hopkins retained some independent, non-Catholic tastes. He seemed able to blind himself at times to his own deviation from the orthodoxy required of him. Tut-tut. So, to four areas where he looked to Milton as a model. Now, simplicity may not be quite the first quality we associate with Milton. But fairly early in his poetic career, Hopkins admitted to Bridges, "No doubt my poetry errs on the side of oddness, and I hope in time to have a more balanced and Miltonic style." As I feel for what he could have meant, I notice that Milton has a strong, controlling mind which keeps him to the point, whereas Hopkins' teeming brain sprouts offshoots which are sometimes hard to follow. Here is Milton in the first sentence of Paradise Lost. I'm sorry if the print's rather small, but I shall read it for you. That first sentence lasts 16 lines, but it keeps absolutely on track. It's magnificent how he marshals the words and keeps them on track, all serving the overall direction. This is how Paradise Lost begins. Of man's first disobedience, and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world, and all our world with lots of Eden, till one greater man restore us, and regain the blissful seat, sing heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed in the beginning how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos. Or if Zion hill delight thee more, and Siloa's brook that flowed fast by the oracle of God, I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song, that with no middle flight intends to soar above the Ionian mount, while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. One sentence. Fantastic. What beautiful writing. Now, by comparison, we shall look at the Hopkins Purcell sonnet again, which he thought very highly of. He called it one of my very best pieces. And particularly, we're going to look at the second half, lines 9 to 14, which he admits could have been better worked out. He sent Bridges a prose translation or synopsis of the poem, which for that second half reads, "So that while he, Purcell is aiming only at impressing me, his hearer, with the meaning in hand, I am looking out, meanwhile, for his specific, his individual markings and mottling, the sakes of him. It is as when a bird, thinking only of soaring, spreads its wings. A beholder may happen then to have his attention drawn by the act to the plumage displayed. Now, by referring to the composer's markings and mottling, he is bringing the image of the bird into his thought before he lets us in on the comparison. And in the poem, he does it even more, to the point of confusion. He talks of Purcell's quaint moon marks, his pelted plumage under wings, before he mentions the stormfowl at all, which is, of course, the source of the comparison. I can imagine Milton saying, keep to one thought at a time, and keep them in an order that your listener can follow. Now, Bridges had such problems understanding this poem, Henry Purcell, that their correspondence about the poem rumbled on for several years. And for this, or whatever other reason, Hopkins tried now to rein himself in. He wrote Henry Purcell in April 1879. In August, he produced the poem Andromeda with the covering letter. I endeavoured in it at a more Miltonic plainness and severity than I have anywhere else. Now, I had never studied Andromeda before preparing for this talk, and I experienced my usual reactions every time I come to a Hopkins poem for the first time. At first reading, I go, what? I can make nor head nor tail of this. This is not very plain. Look at those first 4 lines. Now times Andromeda on this rock rude, with not her either beauties equal or her injuries, looks off by both horns of shore, her flower, her piece of being, doomed dragon's food. Phew. And then at second reading, I go, wow, as some of the ingenuity and detailed thought breaks over me. We go on, lines 5 to 8. Time passed. She has been attempted and pursued by many blows and banes. But now here's roar, a wilder beast from west than all were. More rife in her wrongs, more lawless, and more lewd. And in the letter to Bridges, he calls it a sonnet on which I invite minute criticism, though he instantly supplied his own criticism in the letter by admitting, I cannot say it has turned out severe, still less plain. If that was his real aim, we have to agree that he hasn't hit it. But he then salvages some self-respect by saying, it seems almost free from quaintness, and in aiming at one excellence, I may have hit another. Well, he has reined himself in, which in the circumstances may be a form of excellence. Henry Purcell was in 6-foot lines, which are known as Alexandrines. Here, he goes back to the basic 5-foot pentameter a la Milton. Each of the 2 first quatrains, 2 first 4-line bits, is a disciplined single sentence. He's trying to be more disciplined than Miltonic. Most unusually, he offered this poem for publication as a sonnet with correct rhythm, because he knew that he didn't often achieve that, though it was rejected, it was not published. He gives the sonnet its required turning point or change of subject by introducing Perseus at the beginning of the second half, strictly according to the rules. Here we go on. line 9 and following, her pursues linger and leave her to her extremes. On pillowy air he treads of time, and hangs his thoughts on her, forsaken that she seems, all while her patience morseled into pangs, months. Then to a light disarming, no one dreams, with Gorgon's gear and bare bill, thongs and fangs. Well, as for quaintness, certainly there are no strained or outrageous rhymes, which he sometimes does, no stretching a single word across from one line to another, which he sometimes does, but in the process, perhaps he's lost some of the life and the individuality. He allows himself to be controlled by the Andromeda Perseus story and the allegory he sees in it. Andromeda is the Christian church, and Perseus is her absent Christ whose return to rescue her she awaits. He sticks to it. He doesn't allow his own experience or further thoughts to take him off on tangents. As Hopkins' poems go, it's relatively easy to follow. Though not very easy, certainly not to us today. It would perhaps have been easier for educated Victorian contemporaries who were more exposed to the Andromeda story than we are. In 1852, when Hopkins was 8, Charles Kingsley had written the definitive Victorian poem Andromeda, duly famous at the time, but put the two side by side, as Hopkins in his generation clearly invites by using the same title, Andromeda by Kingsley, Andromeda by Hopkins, and you are once again judderingly aware of how different he is. Kingsley's poem is 500 lines of 12 syllables, and he is telling the classical story alone, no Christian allegory. So Hopkins' treatment is very compressed indeed in comparison. And what about Milton? What would he have thought of Hopkins' Andromeda poem? A long way to go before you are as plain and severe as me. Try again. And he did try again. Much later, near the end of his life, a moment of truth came when he discovered that his two advisors, Bridges and Dixon, had to help each other puzzle out Hopkins' poem called Tom's Garland. They literally wrote to each other and said, "What is this about? Can you help me?" And Hopkins said, "It is plain I must go no further on this road. If you and he cannot understand me, who will?" And in most of his last few poems that remained, he cut himself back to simpler, starker diction. And the words now have remarkable power because they are so plain and clear. Commentators often refer to them as Miltonic. And a searing example is the one sometimes called by its Latin title, Justus Quidem, or Thou art indeed just, Lord. Listen to this. Thou art indeed just, Lord, if I contend with thee. But, sir, so what I plead is just. Why do sinners' ways prosper? And why must disappointment all I endeavour end? Suffering and maturity often make us simpler and clearer in our thoughts and how we express them. He goes on, "Wert thou my enemy, O my friend, O thou my friend, how wouldst thou worse, I wonder, than thou dost, defeat, thwart me? Oh, the sots and thralls of lust do in spare hours more thrive than I that spends life upon thy cause." Like Milton so often, he delays the watershed turning point moment till after the last 6 lines have started. Here it comes. See, banks and breaks, now leave it how thick. Laced they are again with fretty Sherwood, look! And fresh wind shakes them. Birds build. But not I do. No, but strange times unique, and not breed one work that works. And again, like Milton in his most famous sonnet ending, they also serve who only stand and wait. Hopkins here finishes with a devastating one-line sentence that hammers the whole sonnet home. Mine, O thou Lord of life, send my roots rain. Now that is clear, that is plain, that is, if you like, severe, and I think Milton's eyes are smiling, even in their kindness. My boy, you've done it. So that was simplicity as shown in his late sonnets. Now we're turning to sonnets in their own right. Hopkins was a significant sonneteer. 35 of his 49 completed mature poems, in other words 70%, are sonnets. It was the poetic form he used and practiced most. And he was a radical thinker and innovator in how sonnets should be written. And he looked to Milton as his mentor for both the basic sonnet form and its development. There are two basic forms for sonnets in English. One is the Shakespearean, or English form, as it's called. This has 3 quatrains, or 4-line rhyming units, each with its own set of rhymes. Shall I compare these with sonnets of day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the garden buds of May, and some of these are thought too short a date, and so on. And then there is at the end a final rhyming couplet which gives an emphatic conclusion. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to me. And then there is the Petrarchan or Miltonic form. This is the Italian form made definitive by Petrarch and followed by Milton. It has 2 quatrains at the beginning, the first 8 lines, keeping the same pair of rhymes throughout. So you see youth, year, career, show it, or shooth is how it's pronounced then, truth, near, year, and youth. So just one set of rhymes through those first 8 lines. There is then a 6-line second half called the sestet, and here the writer is allowed some choice in the order of the 3 rhymes. And Hopkins follows Milton and Petrarch as his models, not Shakespeare. And he thinks radically about how the sonnet should be developed in English. Fundamentally, he wants to grow the sonnet to give it its full value. He studied it closely and became concerned that comparing the 2 languages, an English sonnet is shorter than an Italian one, and often more lightweight as a result. English sonnets are often only 3/4 or even 2/3 the length of Italian ones, partly because many Italian words finish with an unstressed syllable that's often not counted in the scansion. If I were Italian, I would say to my son, "Un momento, mio piccolo." In English, that becomes "one moment, my little one." Our words are more clipped and shorter. But it's also because Italian pronunciation holds some sounds longer than English ones, especially double consonants, ottimo, concetto, or even 2 consonants when they come together, artista. We don't do that. We dash on in our pronunciation. And Hopkins concludes The English sonnet is then, in comparison with the Italian, short, light, tripping, and trifling. This has been instinctively felt, and the best sonnets show various devices successfully employed to make up for the shortcoming. And he gives 4 or 5 instances, and for a moment we might almost be in one of his lectures, and in 2 of the examples he gives, Milton is the example he chooses. And this, what you will see, explains why he writes a lot of his sonnets in the way he does. It isn't just automatic, he's deliberately choosing to follow these rules. You can slow the line down and give it extra weight by breaks and pauses in the line. The example he chooses is the opening of Milton's Civil War sonnet, when the assault was attended to the city. The opening line goes, "Captain," or "Colonel" is how they pronounce colonel, and "Captain," or "Colonel," or "Knight-in-Arms." Do you see how he's broken the line up with gaps to make it last longer? And Hopkins himself achieves the same effect of breaks and pauses in, for instance, "Generations have trod, have trod, have trod." Or think of the interjections "o" and "ah" in "Oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, with warm breast and with bright wings." You see, he's saying, I want to break this line up with pauses and gaps to make it last longer. A second way he notices for slowing or lengthening a line is by using many monosyllables, words that are only 1 syllable long, so that the line has the maximum number of possible separate words in it. And the example he gives is the last line of Milton's first sonnet, which goes, "Both them I serve, and of their train am I." He might equally have chosen the last line of the more famous sonnet on Milton's wife's death. "I waked, she fled, and day brought back my night." Single syllable, 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 10 of them in the line makes it take longer. And of course, Hopkins became a master of this himself. "Like the ooze of oil crush, why do men then now not wreck his throne?" In that same sonnet, lines 6 to 8, there are 29 words, and 28 of them are single syllable. "And all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge, and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel, being shod." The only double syllable word there is the reading towards the end. That takes more time to read, either aloud or silent, and is helping the sonnet to fill out its proper space. Now, the other techniques he notes, he doesn't actually quote Milton as an example, but he easily could have done, as we'll see. It may be done, as he says, by the mere gravity of the thought, which compels a longer dwelling on the words, making you stop and think. Examples from Milton jump to mind. "When I consider how my light is spent." What does he mean? It makes you just stop and enter it. "They also serve who only stand and wait." The gravity of the thought slows us down. And Hopkins, following of the model, is ready to hand. I've gone too far, sorry. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. Such a expanding thought in that line to give it its full meaning. And the fourth example he gives of sonnet words achieving extra space in length is by inversion of word order. So you don't put words in the natural order as if you were speaking conversationally. The words now make you reflect rather than tripping off the tongue. In Milton, who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. In Hopkins, consider the effect of the delayed verbs, making it take longer, making us wait for the whole of what he's trying to say. And though the last lights, in prose we would say, went off the black west, but he says, and though the last lights off the black west went. And then he carries on, O morning, at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods. And that bent world is an example of another of Hopkins' favourite devices. It's called enjambment, where he makes you wait for the next word that you need by putting it at the beginning of the next line. And over the bent world broods. So you see, he's at work in all these different ways, trying to make the sonnet longer and stronger. But he was not content with just filling the sonnet out to be the right Italian length. He began to want to expand the sonnet beyond that so that it could say even more. And here he pushes beyond being the disciple of Milton. Guided by Milton at first, he now becomes a radical innovator. He'd already experimented with the shortened curtal sonnet. Now he tries the lengthened chordated sonnet. That's a sonnet with a coda, a tailpiece added on. He'd been feeling for ways to expand the sonnet to say more for a long time. Back in 1879, he wrote Henry Purcell in what we call Alexandrines, the 6-foot lines rather than Miltonic 5. So that's one way of making it a bit longer. He did it again next year with Felix Randall. He also gave Henry Purcell a prose introduction, so it can say a bit more. Some people call it the argument, as if it's just a prose summary of the poem in advance to help the reader understand. But it's more than that. It's making an extra point there isn't room for in the poem. These words in the yellow there, Purcell has beyond that uttered in notes, the very musical notes, the very make and species of man as created both in him and in all men generally, and you won't find that point in the poem itself. He couldn't squeeze it in. So he wrote his prose introduction to make sure he said it somewhere. By late 1884, in Dublin, he was working on Scout from Sybil's Leaves. He struggled with it for 2 years. The subject matter forced him, as you can see, to stretch the bounds of what a sonnet could do. It's still 14 lines, but he inflates them, not just to 6 feet in each line, as he would with Alexandrines, not even 7, but this one has got 8 feet in each line. He called it the longest sonnet ever made, and clearly the process could go no further without bursting. Instead of making the sonnet wider like that, he now needs to make it taller or longer. And so a year later, his next 3 poems introduce the coda. First one was this Tom's Garland. On the 2nd of November 1887, he wrote to Bridges, "Please tell me how correctly to make codas to sonnets with the most approved order of rhymes," and so on. "A sonnet is hot on the angle and wants the coda." Now that sonnet was Tom's Garland, and evidently Bridges replied promptly, as Hopkins wrote that 4 days later, "I am thankful to you for the account of the coda. It seems they are formed on an invariable plan, and that Milton's sonnet gives an example." Milton's sonnet is on the new forces of conscience under the Long Parliament. Not going to read all of that, so it doesn't matter what the words are, it's just showing you the shape of it. And at this important juncture in Hopkins' writing, he once again takes Milton as his model. Tom's Garland follows it almost exactly. Both poems have 20 lines, the first 14 much as usual, though Hopkins is making his lines slightly longer to follow the Italians. So the 14 lines as usual, then 2 3-line, let's call them tercets, these 2 blocks of 3 lines at the end, each of them beginning with a half line. And the only slight variation is the rhyming in the sestet, the second half. Milton's going tent, pull, ticks, call, tricks, trent, whereas Hopkins is going bread, head, ground, sped, dead, sun. But as we've heard already, it's okay in the sestet to do your own thing with the rhyme scheme. When it comes to the coda's tercets, those last sets of 3 lines, he follows Milton's rhyme pattern precisely. So Milton goes, men shears ears, fears charge large. Hopkins goes, bound wear bare, care rage age, following Milton's rhyme scheme precisely. The coda sonnet was mainly used in Italian for satire, and Milton adopts this tone. But both he and Hopkins have serious purpose in these coda sonnets. Milton attacks parliamentary legislation, enforcing set patterns for ordination and liturgy, and he finishes with the famous words, new presbyter is but old priest, writ large. And Hopkins in Tom Garland is writing upon the unemployed. So they are serious political messages in both poems. And Hopkins was delighted with the result. He told Bridges, it has a kind of rollick at all events. The coda is an immense resource to have. Now he's now on a roll and naturally makes a sort of coda out of the companion piece, Harry Ploughman. But his creative imagination is firing, and he can't be content to stick to the rules. The whole poem this time is 19 lines, but with shorter burden lines, as he calls them, now scattered about the poem in the octave, the first half, and the sestet, the second half, so that the coda is incorporated in the poem rather than tacked on at the end. And he suggests that these burden lines could be read as, or recited by, a chorus. And they have an element of repeating or reflecting on what's gone just before to give it emphasis, as if the ploughman were deepening or re-ploughing the furrow. Now, poor Hopkins never had an audience of more than one, so he never heard people giving his poems the effects he could hear in his head. But we have the resources to be a reciting chorus. So let's give it a try. Can you see those words clear enough to make out what they are? What I'd like is I'll read the white ones and then you read as a chorus echo the greeny, yellowy ones, which are the shorter burden lines. And this, you won't understand the individual words without notes. This is another of the poems that Bridges and Dixon couldn't make head or tail of, but it is actually a wonderful description of the muscular, athletic ploughman, which Hopkins, the rather small, slight figure, admired so much. But let's just enjoy the words, reading them like that. Hard as hurdle arms, with a broth of goldish flume breathed round, the rack of ribs, the scooped flank, lank rope over thigh, knee nave, and barreled shank.
Head and foot, shoulder and shank.
By a grey eye's heed, steered well, one crew, full two. Stand out, stress! Each limb's barrelly drawn, his thew, that one where curlied, one where sucked or sank.
Sword sank.
Though as a beach bow firm, finds his as at a roll call rank, and features in flesh what deed he each must do.
His service spread.
He leans to it, Harry bends, look, back, elbow, and liquid waste in him all quail to the wallowing of the plough. His cheek crimsons, curls wag or cross-bridle in a wind-lifted, wind-laced.
Sees women living on space.
Churl's grace too, child of a man's strength, how it hangs or hurls them broad in bluff hide, his frowning feet lashed. Raced with, along them, crag iron under, and cold furls.
The fountains shining shot for those.
Yeah, give yourselves a round of applause. That's what Hopkins wanted, a chorus reciting the burden lines. Now, Tom's Garland added 2 2.5 line tercets as codas to a conventional 14-line sonnet, exactly according to Milton's template. Harry Plowman is also a conventional 14-line sonnet, extended to coda length by adding the 5 burden lines here and there. The next sonnet, which I just call Heraclitean Fire for short, breaks the mould still further. It stretches to 24 lines. It has not 2, but 3 2.5 line codas at the end then, plus a short burden line right at the very end for good measure. The full-length lines have gone back to being 6-foot Alexandrines with a halfway caesura break to take breath in each line. You feel Hopkins is emptying out his whole box of tricks on this one, and that he really can't go any further and still pretend it is just a sonnet. But it allows him to say so much more than usual. He has, this time, not 2 sections, as convention dictates, but 3. The first can take 9 lines rather than the usual 8, because he's got the space. And because of the 6 feet, the lines are more leisurely than usual. If you tot up the syllables, those 9 lines would actually be 10.5 in a normal sonnet, and deep into the second half before he's finished them. And the second section, which begins with this but, in line 10, as it objects to the Heraclitean prospect for the future of human life, and halfway through that, he shouts, "Enough!" and starts the third section, which counters with the comforting Christian doctrine of the resurrection. And once again, he nods to Milton as he changes tack there, halfway through a line. Milton delayed his turning point like this in over half his sonnets, 10 out of 18, to give them extra punch after making you wait for it. But this has gone way beyond anything maverick that Milton did. It was of this Heraclitean poem that Hopkins said, "The effect of studying masterpieces is to make me admire and do otherwise." He doesn't copy, he goes his own way. He was referring there to the poem's philosophy, but clearly it's equally true of this totally new, different structure for the poem. And in the process, he's produced a masterpiece of his own, in my view, one of the very greatest poems in English literature. Now, lastly, and perhaps most important of all, and briefly, in what people think of as the most distinctive and idiosyncratic feature of his verse, sprung rhythm, Hopkins sees Milton as his only model who used it consciously and deliberately. In 1873 to 74, he taught rhetoric and poetic composition to his fellow Jesuit students at Manresa House in Roehampton. He studied Milton's rhythms and investigated something very striking, which apparently no one else had. Milton did not always adhere to the strict running rhythm of iambic pentameter, di-dum, di-dum, di-dum. And this was over a year before Hopkins returned to writing poetry himself, but the ideas were there to experiment and incorporate when he did. What he discovered was that Milton gave permission and legitimacy to sprung rhythm. First came the wreck of the Deutschland in 1876. He described his composition to Dixon like this: "I had long had haunting my ear the echo of a new rhythm, which I now realized on paper." And then on the 1st and 2nd of March 1877, he wrote from St. Minos to his mother, "I must send you 2 sonnets I wrote in a freak the other day." A freak was a wild moment of breaking the rules. But then he says, "They're not so very queer, but have a few metrical effects, mostly after Milton, as in his light from above, from the fountain of light," in Paradise Regained. He gives some other examples as well, but let us note that within an overwhelmingly iambic context, di-dum, 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 5 times, that line is classic sprung rhythm, where the stressed syllable is followed by more than one unstressed, light from above, from the fountain of light. And Hopkins follows it exactly in line 1 of the Starlight Melody. "Look at the stars, look up at the skies," is what he sent to his mother. And the day before this, he wrote his other poem, God's Grandeur, with what was historically, therefore, by one day, the remarkable line, Hopkins' first deliberate attempt at sprung rhythm in a sonnet: "Generations have trod, have trod, have trod." Again, 4 feet, not 5, and this time the rhythm pattern: weak, weak, strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak, strong. And where did the idea come from? Answer, according to Hopkins, it was Paradise Lost, book 11, line 79, "by the waters of life where'er they sat." And he wrote to Bridges the next month, mentioning the passages in Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained we've looked at alongside others, and he continued, "The choruses of Milton's Samson Agonistes are still more remarkable. Milton's achievements are quite beyond any other English poets, perhaps any modern poets. Like the Greek tragedies that it's emulating, Samson Agonistes contains passages of comment and narrative for recitation by a chorus." I won't ask us to do it all together this time, but again, it's a chorus, and here Milton provides variety and vitality by, yes indeed, sprung rhythm. Here are the opening lines of the first chorus in Samson Agonistes. No di-dum, di-dum, di-dum here at all. This is he, softly a while. Let us not break in upon him. Oh, change beyond report, thought or belief. See how he lies at random, carelessly diffused, with languished head unpropped, as one past hope, abandoned, and by himself given over, in slavish habit, ill-fitted weeds o'erworn and soiled. Or do my eyes misrepresent? Can this be he, that heroic, that renowned, irresistible Samson, whom unarmed no strength of man or fiercest wild beast could withstand, who tore the lion as the lion tears the kid, ran on embattled armies clad in iron, and weaponless himself, made arms ridiculous, useless the forgery of brazen shield and spear, the hammered cuirass, Chaldean tempered steel, and frock of mail adamantian proof. And that last short line is the whole line. Note that as well as having varying rhythms, the lines are of varying length, like that last one. Some have 4 feet, some 5, but many have fewer, and some even more. This gave the template for the leaden and golden echoes. The Hopkins' one finished attempt at dramatic choruses. His unfinished St. Winifred's Well and Epithalamium are also in this rhythmically free structure with lines of irregular lengths. Those poems followed Greek models to some extent, but Milton was the unprecedented exemplar in English. 5 years later, when Hopkins' theories on sprung rhythm were further developed, he told Bridges Milton was the only poet since Elizabethan times to use sprung rhythm consciously and constantly. I quote, "Robert Greene was the last who employed it at all consciously, and he never continuously. Then it disappeared. For one cadence in it here and there is not sprung rhythm, and one swallow does not make a spring, or perhaps it should be a sprung." And then he says, "I put aside Milton's case, for it is altogether singular." In other words, he did indeed use sprung. So that is the moment to conclude. I regard Milton as our second greatest poet after Shakespeare, and part of his greatness is his far larger and more complete output than Hopkins. Most of Milton's great poems are longer than Hopkins' longest, the Wreck of the Deutschland. Milton built cathedrals in verse, where Hopkins was a jeweled miniaturist. But for all Milton's greatness, the evidence we've seen today shows Hopkins as the more daring and adventurous poetic theorist and experimenter, certainly in the world of the sonnet. What might he have achieved if he had had official encouragement and Milton's 2 periods of leisure at the beginning and end of his life to concentrate on poetry alone? Hopkins was not granted those, alas.